Welcome to Biztech's Community Conversation Show, the show where we engage community leaders to understand and highlight issues facing the broader community. Now, today we feature Yayasan Chow Kit and speak to its founder, Dato Dr. Hartini Zainudin. Now, Dr. Hartini, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Hi, Brian. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Please call me Tini because I'm more comfortable with that.
Okay, Tini, fine. We'll do that. Now, Tini, for a start, tell us about your history, your journey.
Sure. Okay, I'm one of the co-founders. I actually founded the organization with two other people from the community who actually live and work in Chow Kit. We started it as a program under a different foundation in 2006. We opened our doors and expanded it as that program in 2007, incorporated it as a foundation in 2012. So we've been around a long time. The reason why I decided to start this organization or found this organization was simply because there were so many gaps in terms of looking at child protection, and so many children falling through the gaps and not even getting basic needs met. So we're talking about food and shelter and being left out in the street and, you know, waiting for parents who worked all night, and getting all sorts of cases of violations against children. I think by the end of 2007, when we opened our doors in April of 2007, we had about 69 cases involving about 100 over children, just cases in violation. So it was something that I felt very passionate about, working in this space for a long time in America, in the US, and it was something that I thought was not necessary and something we could fix if we advocated, provided services, and looked at ways to work together with the community to ensure that all children were helped.
And then fast forward to 2020, 2021, what do you do today?
So basically what we've decided, and it's partly because of the pandemic as well, is sort of pivot and approach child protection from a different angle, looking at ways in which we can address the issues of scarce resources and funding restrictions, but being able to be more aggressive in terms of looking at programs more holistically, while including the community at large as equal stakeholders, and sort of creating a bubble of sorts, like an ecosystem where children were better protected, going from district to, or area to area. So basically, just fending for ourselves, getting like-minded people to work with us on the different child protection pillars, and building it ourselves without looking at just pure funding in itself, looking at ways to collaborate, share resources, and still work on providing a better child protection system.
Now, Tini, can we have some quick definitions between what is charity and how different that is to social justice? Because generally people kind of mix that up.
Yeah. So for me, charity is something we should move away from. Charity is your quick fix, instant gratification type of approach to helping someone else. So it's the simplest version I can give is you see a beggar on the street, you decide to give him 1 ringgit, you put it in his cup and you walk away and you feel good. That's charity. Whereas, you know, I believe that social justice is a goal and it's a process that we need to achieve, moving away from charity and that short-term instant gratification, you will forget who the person is, and moving towards a needs-based where you invest in the communities, really listen to what they say, what they want, what they need, and then sort of championing the needs and sort of advocating and highlighting what it is they need to do to be able to be empowered and be able to fend for themselves. So that empowerment, being able to fend for themselves is what social justice tends to be. So that's a goal that we should be moving towards. It's a process where everybody sorts of have a level playing field. Yeah.
This is around somewhere where at Biztech also we feel that, and we want to promote this really social philanthropy, sustainable philanthropy. Because the thing is, especially with a lot of corporates, as you mentioned, it's the one-off feel-good thing that they can write on their annual report that they did this as a box ticking exercise, but really there is no sustainable impact. And now with more and more corporations globally looking at sustainability from a very holistic perspective, we should be now looking at this space to ensure that everyone does sustainable philanthropy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I cringe every time someone's asked me, oh, so you do charity? I'm like, I don't do charity. You know, I look at investing in communities, supporting communities, advocating and highlighting issues so they can fend for themselves. The whole purpose of the work that I do, especially for children and youth, and this is something I think that is, you know, where we should go, is the fact that we need to empower and ensure that the communities we serve, in my case, children, are empowered with life skills and options to make better decisions for themselves. It is not depending on us. That's sustainability. And we have to move away from that word charity. It's really about investing. It's about equal power. It's about bringing different stakeholders, especially in bringing communities to the table and shifting that power thing. It's not one is better than the other. Everybody has a space. Everybody is an expert coming to table to solve social issues.
You're very close to the ground. I mean, you work on the ground.
Yeah.
What are some of the trends that you've seen, especially prior to the pandemic? Then obviously a lot of things have changed during the pandemic. And now as we're exiting the pandemic towards a new normal, which is really a hybrid situation, what have you seen on the ground?
There are so many things I think I'm looking at in terms of trends. Strategy is one of them. Strategy in terms of short-term, medium, and long-term goals. It's not just about feeding. I'll give you an example, food distribution. So it's not about feeding hungry people alone. It's about ensuring, like I said, if the end goal is resilience and sustainability, then there's the emergency food relief, feeding hungry people is step one. It's short-term. Then you need to move to food security, where people are able to plant their own, get seeds, plant their own vegetables, grow their own, food, etc. and stuff, making sure you have at the same time transitioning into having communal soup kitchens, looking at different ways to bring in suppliers, etc. and stuff. So that has to be that. And then the third phase, which is the long-term goal, would be food sovereignty, right? Where they can exchange food, you have restaurants, you have all these different things. So it's not a one-step thing. It is a long-term process. It is not looking at funding, especially where it's a 3 to 6 month to 1 year program, but an actual 3 to 5 year investment. So you're looking at things in a more holistic manner, yes, addressing the micro and macro issues at the same time, and making sure the community actually is empowered to take care of themselves.
That's a very good point, because one of the key things that I think corporates especially would look at is, and individuals who are really focused on outcomes, is how do we help these people help themselves?
Yes.
And some of the programs that we've got to put in is really around those steps that you talked about, but also then concurrently helping them with either employability or skill sets, upgrading of their skill sets in order for them to become self-sustained.
The whole point of poverty, let's take poverty as an example. It's not about income. It is about loss of dignity. Poverty is when you can't fend for yourself and you can't take care of yourself or your family, right? So it's really about ensuring that, poor people have that dignity restored or that dignity installed, and making sure that they have better options to make better choices and take care of themselves and their families. That's really what solving poverty is. So we need to move away from traditional ways of measuring poverty, looking at poverty. What is the criteria for poverty? All that has to change, because it's different now after the pandemic, much, much different. And we're racing against ensuring that, poor people have enough to eat, poor people get jobs. We have to hone talent, we have to develop jobs, we have to, ensure that they can do it themselves, they can sustain their jobs. It's a whole different ballgame, and something that I think is much more intelligent.
And also, Tini, I think one of the key things that's happened in a Malaysian context is really the fact that from a macro perspective, we used to categorize income as T20, so the top 20, M40, and B40. M40, middle 40, which is the middle class, and B40, which is the bottom 40. However, trends have shown that the M40 has shrunk to an M20 or M30. And then there's a huge chunk of people, because of this pandemic, that have fallen into the bottom half of the pyramid.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And now you see, you know, the middle class shrinking, as you've mentioned, and the fact that they need support with foods. They've lost jobs. They have no daycare. They have no kindergartens. They have no online educational access for their children. You know, parents both can't go back to work. So many things are happening. You know, our early childhood education system, Malaysia, has collapsed. 50% of all the kindergartens and nursery have closed. Not everyone has access to online. We're talking about, you know, ambulance services. We're talking about, you know, children not having shelters, kids who have lost one or both parents during the pandemic, things we've never dealt with before, people being chased out of their homes because they can't pay rent, no homes, no shelters, kids who've, you know, the numbers of children who've been sexually abused or have had, you know, some kind of mental trauma, physical trauma. All these were things that, yes, were there, but they've skyrocketed, not 100, 200%, 1,000, 2,000%. It's a huge issue from a child protection angle. Anyway, so, and you know, forget everything else. And now we know that there's a follow-on effect, right? It's not just about looking at one pillar of hunger or one pillar of education. It's all holistic, as you say, and they're all interconnected. So when you lose your job, you lose your food, you lose your kids, you have malnutrition, you don't. So it's a knock-on effect, and we need to pull ourselves together and work together.
Now, from a macro perspective, now recently you just participated in a session at the Hasanah Forum 2021, People and Society, Strengthening from the Bottom Up, with a couple of other panelists.
Yeah.
What were 3 key takeaways for you from that session? And what did you learn from, say, some of the other panelists?
I think the 3 key takeaways are that, you know, this whole concept of charity has to be challenged, it has to go. That's one thing I've already said. That we need to ensure that the communities we serve have feedback and are actually vital to making any kind of sort of changes or policies, right, on that affect them, whether it's poverty or access to education, etc. and stuff. Communities are equal stakeholders, and that they are vital to making policy changes. I think a third one was the fact that we need to change the mindsets of donors and investors in terms of looking at how we address these issues, right? You can't just pick one pillar and say you want to do education. That's just not how it works anymore. That, you know, that we need to look at, you know, funding programs and stuff on a 3 to 5 year basis. It's not a 1-year thing. You can't make sustainable change on a 1-year funding donor. That we need to look at, you know, resources as not just funding, but human development or human capital, and looking at volunteerism and looking at expertise. So, I mean, there's lots of different takeaways. I mean, that panel was amazing, very inspiring. Okay, and
following up on that, how can then the corporate sector and institutional investors work with NGOs and civil organizations to really drive sustainable change and close the gap in terms of inequalities?
Well, I think it started pre-pandemic. We had the Malaysian Collective Impact looking at education, for example, where corporates, you know, like 20, 30 corporates came together to look at providing and driving change in education in poor communities. But we need a lot more educational awareness, a lot of understanding and, you know, advocating that corporates collaborate, that, you know, shared resources doesn't mean it takes away from your brand. Shared resources and working together doesn't mean you don't take care of your stakeholders or your investors, right? The shareholders, that's the word I was looking for. That, you know, if you want to build stronger communities, you can, and it doesn't take away from building stronger businesses as well. In fact, I think it sort of highlights and shows how how effective and sustainable it is. And the fact that we need to look at different types of non-traditional stakeholders, the most important being communities. They are not your beneficiaries. Please, let's do away that word. Is there such thing as beneficiaries? They're all equal stakeholders addressing issues of abject poverty, child protection, you know, health issues, whatever it is. They're not beneficiaries. They are equal experts who understand the issue because they live it. So I think when you do this mind shift and when you promote this mind shift and you understand it, we're going to get there a lot faster.
Okay, Tini, then on the other side, flip side of the equation, especially during the pandemic, have you sensed a wave of donor fatigue? Because initially everyone was rushing out to do these feeding programs and things like that, and then donor fatigue probably set in. Could you share your personal experiences and observations, and also perhaps some strategies that you potentially should be putting in to address this?
Sure. So yes, so everybody was rushing in, you know, fistful of dollars to hand it over to NGOs working on the ground, especially with food, on child protection, sexual abuse and stuff. And sort of 22 months into it, it's waning. I mean, it's a struggle to even feed 50 people a day. And the reason is, yes, donor fatigue. I think, you know, the desensitization on policies, the shock has weared off. There is an assumption that just because we're coming out of the pandemic and some people are doing well, or some businesses are doing well, that everybody will, you know, sort of get back on their feet without understanding that there is a knock-on effect and the impact is long lasting. People have lost their jobs, businesses have closed. We need to actually stay the course and ensure that, you know, we understand that we're in for the long haul. And the impact is not just from an economic standpoint, but the economic standpoint has had direct and horrible consequences and impact on poor and marginalized communities and different groups as well, whether it's the elderly, disabled, etc. So I think the donor fatigue is understandable, but we need to sort of take a step back, take 2 steps back, and understand that this isn't about your business, your community alone. This is about the effect on the country, on the region, and that we need to sort of, you know, actually be more resolute in terms of looking at how we can work together and share more in terms of resources. And like I said, it's not just about funding. It's about expertise, logistics, volunteerism, and putting your money where your mouth is as well. People made money too. It's not that all businesses lost money. Some people made money, and those businesses have an obligation and duty to help. It's not just on government alone, and that's the part. I mean, I'm on the National Recovery Council, right? And the government is trying to do what they can, but there's no way they can address every single issue. That's why communities stepped in. That's why you saw a rise in community and grassroots organizations stepping in to fill in the gaps where the government could. But we need corporates, we need donors, we need people of influence, captains of the industry, addressing, pick your issues, but just know that your issues are related and we're in for the long haul. Now is the time to get more invested, not pull away and think where everyone's going to do well by themselves. It's not going to happen. So
Tini, zooming in on Yayasan Chow Kit for 2022, what are your plans?
Well, I'm pivoting. So instead of addressing all child protection issues that affect Chow Kit, we're going in phases. We're actually combining all our centers into one main building. We're actually trying to raise the money for that. But we're actually looking at case management as a framework to be able to address certain issues that really resonate and are really crucial to the community in Chow Kit in child protection. So we're looking at shelters, looking at ways we can collaborate regionally, not just Malaysia, to look at ways we can look at foster care, to look at adoption reviews, to address children who have been affected and impacted by COVID, but also children who have, you know, been in institutions for a long time that need a different approach to, you know, achieving resilience. That's one. Number 2, we're looking at access to health for all children. Critically ill children in Malaysia are having a hard time getting more than basic access to healthcare. Children are dying. You know, we need to look at malnutrition, the impact on not having food for 22 months. Yeah, no proper food is having an impact on children, little babies. The fact that we need to look at education. Online education is just one traditional way of looking at. There are alternatives, especially if you're marginalized and you are a refugee or you're stateless or you're migrants who have no access to the internet, let alone content. So we're looking at different ways to sort of hone talent and find ways to also, look at children who've dropped out of school, because many children have dropped out of school after the pandemic, and find ways to hone their skills and to ensure that resilience is there. So those are the three: education, health, and shelters and foster care, to be able to ensure that the children that we serve have more options and better choices. So we started there, but again, looking at collective impact approaches and collaboration and shared resources as the way to go. That's the only way to go right now. We cannot do it by ourselves.
It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Not at all. Thank you so much for providing this space, because it's much needed. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks a lot. I'm Brian Fernandez, and I've been speaking to Dato Dr. Hartini Zainudin, founder of Yayasan Chow Kit, on Biztech's Community Conversation Show. This video and podcast will be on our various social media platforms, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thank you very much for tuning in.